You wake up in a drafty wooden house. Straw on the floor, smoke curling from a hole in the roof. Your throat is dry. A woman hands you a ceramic mug filled with something cloudy and faintly bitter. It's beer. Before you can protest, she tells you something that changes everything. In this village, nobody drinks the water. Not the nobles, not the monks, not the children. Your neighbor tried the pond water last spring. He spent 2 weeks in bed with cramps so violent he couldn't stand. The well near the church made 3 families sick last autumn. 2 of their kids didn't recover. The river downstream? That's where the tanners dump their waste, where the dyers rinse their cloth, where people relieve themselves when they think no one is watching. You take a sip from the mug, it's weak. Almost flat, thin and slightly sour like bread dissolved in liquid. It barely tastes like alcohol at all. By noon, you'll drink 3 more mugs of it. Your kids will too, so will your grandmother, so will the priest. This wasn't luxury, this wasn't celebration, this was survival. For most of the medieval period in Europe, beer and ale weren't drinks of pleasure. They were the primary way human beings stayed alive. And the reason is so obvious once you see it, but so invisible that most people, even today, have never thought about it. The water was trying to kill you. Let's back up. Medieval people didn't have germ theory. They couldn't see bacteria. They didn't know about E. coli or Salmonella or Vibrio cholerae, but they weren't stupid. They watched. They remembered. And the pattern was unmistakable. People who drank plain water got sick. People who drank ale did not. The dominant medical theory of the time was called miasma, the idea that disease traveled through foul air. Corrupt smells meant corrupt health, and water that looked dirty or smelled bad was clearly suspicious. So they avoided it. But here's what they didn't know. The most dangerous water was the water that looked clean. Clear streams can carry microscopic pathogens that kill. A shallow well near a barn can harbor fecal bacteria from animal waste. Rainwater running through a village collects everything, human waste, rotting food, decomposing organic matter, and delivers it invisibly into your cup. Medieval people couldn't see any of this. They only saw the results: stomach cramps, fevers, bloody diarrhea, death. The historian Judith Bennett, in her groundbreaking book Ale, Beer, and Brewsters in England, documents how ale became the default household beverage precisely because the brewing process made water safe. Her research, drawing from centuries of English manorial records and court documents, shows that brewing wasn't optional. It was essential infrastructure. If you didn't brew, you didn't have a safe drink. Period. But what made ale safe? The answer is deceptively simple: heat. To make ale, you boil water with grain. That boiling step, bringing the liquid to a rolling temperature for an extended period, kills the vast majority of harmful bacteria. The yeast then ferments the sugars, producing alcohol, which provides an additional layer of preservation. Medieval brewers didn't understand the microbiology. They just knew the process worked. If you made ale, your family stayed healthy. If you drank from the stream, you got sick. The knowledge was practical, passed from mother to daughter, from monastery to village, for generations. Now there's an important distinction here that most people miss. Ale and beer are not the same thing in the medieval context. Ale was the older drink: water, grain, yeast. No hops, it was sweet, cloudy, and it spoiled within days. Beer came later, especially spreading through northern Europe in the 14th and 15th centuries. Beer included hops, those green cone-shaped flowers from the hop plant. And hops changed everything. Hops contain natural antimicrobial compounds called alpha acids. When you boil hops into the wort, that's the liquid extracted from the grain. These compounds inhibit the growth of harmful bacteria. The beer lasts longer. It stays fresh for weeks instead of days. Brewing historian Ian Spencer Hornsey traces this shift in his comprehensive work A History of Beer and Brewing, showing how hopped beer gradually replaced unhopped ale across much of Europe because it simply kept better. But here's what matters for the people living through it. Your daily drink wasn't some strong, intoxicating brew. Most of what people consumed was called small beer or table ale. This was extremely weak, usually between 1% and 2% alcohol, sometimes even less. You wouldn't feel it. It wouldn't impair you. It was, for all practical purposes, water that had been made safe through the brewing process. It tasted slightly different. It had body. It had calories. But its primary function was hydration without death. This is the part that surprises most people. You drank beer for breakfast. You drank it with lunch. You gave it to your toddler. And you did this because there was no alternative. The water from most sources in a medieval settlement was genuinely dangerous. and the only reliable way to make it safe was to brew it into something else. The medical texts of the time reflect this reality. The Tacuanum Sanitatis, a medieval health handbook adapted from the work of 11th century Arab physician Ibn Butlin, classifies beverages by their health properties. It generally recommends processed drinks over raw water. Medieval physicians, working with the best knowledge available to them, prescribed ale for patients. They advised it for nursing mothers. They recommended it for the elderly. It was medicine. It was food. It was water, all at once. And speaking of food, this matters more than you'd think. Small beer provided calories. A laborer drinking a liter of weak ale daily was consuming roughly 400 to 600 extra calories of carbohydrates, sugars, and B vitamins. In a world without refrigeration, without reliable food supply, without vitamin supplements, those calories could be the difference between strength and collapse during harvest season, between survival and starvation during a hard winter. The monasteries understood this better than anyone. Medieval monasteries were brewing powerhouses. They kept meticulous records. The great English abbeys documented their brewing output in account rolls that survive to this day. A single large monastery might brew hundreds of thousands of gallons annually. The monks themselves received a daily allotment of weak beer as part of their regular provisions, listed right alongside bread and vegetables in their communal records. It was that fundamental. The Trappist monastic tradition carries this legacy into the present. There are roughly 170 Trappist monasteries worldwide today. 14 of them are authorized to brew and sell beer under the Trappist name. The recipes have evolved, but the principle remains. Brewing is part of the contemplative life. It has been for 1,000 years. Now here's the social twist that most histories leave out. Before the rise of large commercial breweries, ale was brewed in individual households, and the people who brewed it overwhelmingly were women. They were called alewives. Judith Bennett's research documents this in extraordinary detail. In medieval England, alewives were licensed, regulated, taxed, and inspected by local authorities. They dominated the brewing trade in most towns and villages from the early medieval period until roughly the 15th century, when commercial competition gradually pushed them out. The alewife wasn't some minor figure. She was an economic force. She sold her surplus. She fed her family through brewing income. She was, in many villages, the most essential person after the baker. Without a competent brewer, a settlement had no safe drink. That was existential. The famous symbol of a broomstick hung outside a door, sometimes linked to the origin of the pharmacy sign, was actually an alewife's signal. Fresh batch ready, come and buy. And the archaeological record confirms all of this in ways that are almost eerily concrete. Research teams analyzing cesspit deposits from medieval English villages have found consistent traces of brewing byproducts. Grain husks, yeast residue, hop fragments, mixed into the waste of ordinary households. The medieval village of Warham, Percy in Yorkshire, one of the most extensively studied deserted medieval settlements in England, yielded years of archaeological data showing that ale consumption was universal across social classes. Not a luxury for the rich, a necessity for everyone. So why was the water so dangerous? Simply because there was no way to treat it. Every modern water treatment plant, every tap, every bottle of purified water works by removing or killing the microscopic organisms that cause disease. Filtration, chlorination, UV treatment, boiling. Medieval people had access to exactly one of those methods, boiling, and brewing was how they applied it systematically. The diseases that water carried were devastating. Dysentery, cholera, typhoid fever. These weren't rare afflictions. They were constant. Infant mortality in medieval Europe ranged from 30 to 50% depending on region and period. A significant portion of those deaths came from waterborne illness. Diarrhea alone, caused by contaminated water, killed more children than any battlefield ever did. The archaeologist Christopher Dyer, in his extensive work on medieval English living standards, draws direct connections between settlement patterns, water access, and disease rates. Villages situated near clean running streams had measurably better health outcomes than those dependent on stagnant wells. But even the best stream could be contaminated by something upstream. There was no reliable way to know. The only safe choice was to brew. And here's where it gets strange when you look at the modern world. We solved the water problem completely. In most developed countries, you can turn a tap and get safe, clean, treated water that won't make you sick. The technology exists. The infrastructure exists, the science is settled. And yet, most people don't drink plain water as their primary beverage. They drink coffee. They drink tea, both of which require boiled water. They drink bottled water that's been filtered and treated. They drink juices, sodas, and seltzers, manufactured beverages that go through extensive processing before they reach your lips. We don't trust raw water, even now, even with everything we know. That instinct, that deep, quiet refusal to simply trust what comes out of a stream or a well isn't irrational. It's inherited. It's the echo of 1,000 years of watching people die after drinking the wrong water. Your ancestors didn't know about bacteria. They didn't need to. They learned through generations of suffering that untreated water was dangerous. And they passed that knowledge forward, not as science, not as theory, as habit, as culture. As the simple practice of brewing your drink before you swallow it. Every time you boil water for tea, you are performing an act of ancient survival. Every time you reach for a coffee instead of a glass of untreated stream water, you are honoring a tradition that stretches back to the darkest, muddiest, most precarious villages of the medieval world. Waterborne illness killed without discrimination. It took the rich and the poor, the young and the old, the faithful and the heretic. It didn't care about your prayers or your status or your strength. It only cared whether you drank the water. Medieval people couldn't name the enemy. They couldn't see it under a microscope or map it on a chart. But they could feel it in their gut, literally. And they built an entire civilization's drinking habits around one simple, life-saving truth. Boiling works. The real reason people drank beer instead of water isn't some charming quirk of history. It isn't a fun fact for a dinner party. It's a survival story. It's the story of human beings figuring out, through pain and loss and the slow accumulation of hard-won knowledge, that the most dangerous thing in their world was the thing they needed most. Water. So the next time you brew your morning coffee or steep your evening tea, pause for 1 second. That habit, that small, automatic act of heating water before you drink it, carries the weight of 1,000 years. It was learned by people who didn't have your science or your infrastructure or your safety net. They learned it because the water was trying to kill them, and they figured out without knowing why that fire was the answer. Boiling and brewing, not just about flavor, about survival. About the quiet, stubborn wisdom of people who had every reason to die and found a way, cup by cup, to live.